What's up, Denver? Chris Lopez here, and today we have a special guest in the studio to talk about ADUs. You may know him from Bigger Pockets as that ADU guy. He's going to come here and talk to us about how he's building ADUs for $100 a square foot, the 2 poison pills for ADUs, talk some strategy, and most importantly, how investors can take knowledge of ADUs and actually go out there and apply it to a project, to an investment, and understand how they can fit it in their game plan. So, Derek Sherrell, that ADU guy, thank you for being in Denver today, man. I'm glad to have you here.
My pleasure. Glad to be here. Nowhere else I'd rather be this morning.
Yeah. So you came into town yesterday to come speak at an event, the Rocky Women's Networking, or I'm butchering that, right?
Rocky Mountain Women's Invest.
Rocky Mountain Women's Invest, which brings us to our third host, Stacy Rozansky, who's our in-house ADU expert. And you're also a very active member in that club as well, which kind of brought everything full circle, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So how was the presentation last night? What do you guys want to know?
You know, it was awesome. I'll tell you this. A room full of high producing, investing women in ADUs. That's like my 2 favorite things in the world, with all due respect. So when I got the call and the invite for that, I was like, yes, please. I'll be on the next flight. So it went really well. I'll tell you one thing that stood out to me. I don't know how many women were in the room, but I asked kind of mid-presentation, how many people in here are looking to purchase their first property? And not a single hand in the room went up.
Really?
Every person in there was in the game. And it just goes to really stamp the fact that I preach often, which is women are way better investors than men. They're more patient, they're more organized, they have less ego, and they drive higher returns over longer periods of time. So that was all evident last night.
Wow, that's a really cool. They are all experienced or had some properties.
Every single one of them had at least one property. So I was blown away. I mean, they were action takers.
Okay. So I got a huge list of questions here. I'm going to start firing them at you, and in no particular order, because we've had the last half hour or 40 minutes, we've been sitting here drinking coffee the day after the presentation, having lots of fun conversations here. So you get asked all the time, ADUs, the landscape, where do you want to start? Where would be a good starting point for quarter 2, 2023, high interest rates? ADUs are, they're evolving in different parts of the world. Denver here is a little bit slower than California, Oregon, where you're at. Where does someone start? What you think about ADUs?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would always start by understanding your local market. So the really, I'd say the greatest advantage of an accessory dwelling unit is it's very similar to a duplex, preferably a detached duplex, and less people know about them. So as new investors are trying to break into the market, and kind of the crown jewel is the small multifamily, the duplex, triplex, or quadplex, where we can come in with low down and get owner occupant financing. The ADU is kind of a trick to go around a lot of the competition and look for a better deal. And I always tell people it's a small multifamily property in a highly desirable single family neighborhood. But the trick of finding the ADU is understanding where you can and can't deploy it. And that usually starts with the planning and zoning office.
Yeah, let's dig into here, because Stacy, we've done some detailed stuff on zoning and in Denver and surrounding counties in Denver as well, and it's a smorgasbord. So we have an investor coming in here. You don't know Denver, but you know how to come in and go through things. Denver zoning. So we got people wanting to look at ADUs in Denver. Where would they start? I'm gonna ask you first, Dirk. They come in, where would they start?
Yeah, great question. So this is a people business. This is a relationship business, and we have to go to the decision makers. And in pretty much every case nationwide, that's going to be your planning and zoning office. There's officials in that office that write code, that make decisions. And the planning and zoning code is literally the rule book for how we make money in real estate. And I harp on this all the time. Whenever I speak, I ask anybody in the room who's a land use planner, does anybody even know a land use planner? Has anybody ever read code? It's literally the most important piece of legislation and information for the strategy, and nobody ever looks at it. And it's quite simple. So I always say, become an expert in your local planning and zoning code as it pertains to your strategy. This applies to anything. I mean, if you want to build tiny houses, or you want to do a manufactured home park, or you want to do a commercial multi-use building, you have to understand the zoning code. With accessory dwelling units, it's really simple because the code language is usually 10 pages or less. So when I say become an expert in your local planning and zoning code, I mean call, email, and go into your local planning office, get to know the decision makers, find out the code that dictates your strategy, read it, and then go apply it. It's that simple. But 90% of the time people call me, they say, Derek, I just bought this awesome house with an ADU. I called the city. They said there's no permits and we're going to close tomorrow. What do I do? So people always go shopping and usually purchase even before they understand the zoning code. And the trick is to go understand the zoning code before you go shopping. So if somebody's coming into Denver and they hit up your team, I would highly recommend that you take them by the hand to the planning and zoning department, get a planning and zoning map, ask the planning official to actually circle the areas on the map where we could shop to deploy the strategy that the client wants.
Perfectly said. I would say it's an ever, right now in Denver, it's so much attention on it. So it is ever changing. And so it is super important to know your zoning and, be working with someone who's familiar with it. It's like one of the items on our checklist when we go under contract, right? We double check the zoning because the MLS is not always correct. You want to make sure you're actually doing your due diligence, that you have the correct zoning that you need for your project. And I'll just echo, the planning and zoning committee, they're just people. You can call them, they'll call you back. You can email them. They're not that difficult to reach, but so many people just can't get over that hump of just picking up the phone. So it's super important step.
And you've had no issues reaching out?
No, they respond to email usually quicker than phone calls, but they've always responded, even, in Denver where it's the busiest for sure. They respond, because I don't think a lot of people do it. A lot of people aren't calling them. So it's super important to understand at least a basic level of the code, which we did a whole podcast on, what to look for specifically for ADU zoning. And again, that is changing. Denver is like allowing more zone districts to be able to build ADUs, but that's definitely the first and most important step.
Okay. What's step 2?
The second step would probably be to, it depends. If you're shopping, it's going to be to identify those markets. If you already are under contract on something that you think is in a market area that allows ADUs, and you're under contract, or you're going to purchase, or you're going to make an offer, the most important document you can have is a certificate of occupancy. So I'm going to pick on realtors here for a second, because as ADUs become more and more popular, any house that has any kind of detached anything or garage in the alley or some kind of illegal studio in the basement, a realtor loves to say this has ADU potential. They like to market it as an ADU, and they like to price it as an ADU. And if they can, they'll sell it as an ADU. And it's not a legal existing dwelling unless it has a certificate of occupancy. So that's the second most important call, I think, to the city officials is, hey, I'm looking at this property with my team. It looks like it has an accessory dwelling unit. Can you please pull the archives and pull the record and make sure that it was fully permitted and there's actually a certificate of occupancy? You're going to need that for your insurance rider to put a tenant in there. You're going to need that for peace of mind. You're going to need that for value. And here's the kicker: is if it's not a legal permitted conditioned living dwelling, you can potentially go back to the seller and negotiate the price down. And we could still buy it and close on that if it's in an area where we know we can legally bring it up to code and have it as a legal dwelling. So those are the two things that I see people miss on most often. And that's kind of, I have a flow chart for how are we going to do this ADU process. And if we're on the buyer side, those are the steps. If you already own a property and you're trying to deploy this strategy via a conversion or a new build, it really does start at the planning and zoning office. Again, and it's a direct question always, because zoning is so site specific. Just because your neighbor across the street or even next door on the same block built an accessory dwelling unit does not mean that you can. So it's always a site specific question. Dear Mr., Mrs., they, planner person, can I build an ADU at 123 Adams Street? Yes or no? I always say to get no's verbally, and when you get a yes, that will help you ask for an email.
Yep.
Just to have that paper trail.
That's that's not only good for zoning, that's a really good rule of thumb for business and life and general.
And I don't mean that in a manipulative way at all, but what I can say based on 2 decades of experience making these planning calls is you'll get different answers different days. I mean, the trifecta is getting different answers from the same person 3 days in a row. So it's really important to call and get it in writing. And even though I'm an expert in some markets, I still call because it's changing so fast. And especially in Denver right now, we're going to talk site specific for a minute, but the Denver ADU project is like top of mind. It goes to the city council here. We're recording this in spring of 2023, and it's going to the city council next week. So it's really top of mind, and it's radically changing based on what's approved. So it's nice to become an expert in your market, but always the trust but verify. Always get the decision maker's approval in writing before you spend money.
And even just to add to that, you can search for permits online for any address. You don't even have to call. That is something you can do just right from your computer. Super simple process. It'll pull whatever permits are, available. And then you can call beyond that if you have questions, but it's something, you don't even have to take that extra step to actually talk to someone. You can do it just from your computer.
Nice. If I had my gold star sticker book, I'd put one on your car. So that's because she's an expert in her local zoning code.
Yes.
And I didn't know that because I'm not an expert in Denver's code. So great point. You've dug around on the site. We all want to research backsplash. How many times have we looked at different floor coverings for hours? How many times, I'm asking our viewers right now, how many times have you Googled ADUs in Nashville, Tennessee, or can I build an ADU in Austin? It's that simple. Just do the research in a little bit different direction and you can become a pro just like her.
So I want to, something that I see, there is a lot of attention and involvement around ADUs. And of course, we're talking real estate, we're talking governments. It is a slow moving beast.
Mm-hmm.
And I see a lot of people wanting to either find an ADU, which is incredibly hard in Denver, because even if there is an ADU, a lot of them are not permitted or, whatever. And then also people, hey, I want to find a place to go out there and build an ADU. And for a lot of these clients that we talk to, a lot of times they're a new house hacker, maybe on their second or third property, coming having to find a property and then go in there and build an ADU. I see so many issues of, getting all through all the zoning stuff. It comes down to the cost to build and the ability to also finance it. Those are two big hurdles we run into because a lot of times they're, $200,000 plus for an ADU. And then financing it, you're using construction loan. Where do you come up with there? Where, hey, cool, you did 5% down conventional on this property. Now get a construction loan or $250,000 to build this out. So I'm all about like real world implementation. I'm very much like a good enough person when it comes to like just investing in general. So how do you balance like, hey, this is a really good strategy, but very, very, very few people execute it for a variety of reasons of financing, complexity, all this stuff. How do you balance that angle with, finding and building ADUs?
That's a really good question. There's about 4 parts to that. So I'm going to try to take one at a time. It's okay. So trying to find an ADU in Denver can be hard. The actual data I got yesterday is there's 450 legally permitted ADUs between 2010 and today. And that's in Denver, which according to my research is about 800,000 people. So that's a tiny speck of available ADUs to purchase. With that said, the easiest, most effective way to get your own ADU is to buy a house that already has one. You show up at the closing table as an owner occupant with 3.5% to 5% down. You put 30-year fixed rate debt on it, and you forget about it. In a market here where they're few and far between, you're probably going to pay a premium. It's still worth it. On that note, and I'm not a lender and I'm not going to talk too deep in lending, but I want to say something important here is a lot of people will go get pre-qualified for say 700 and they find a house that has an ADU that's 825 and they think it's out of their price range. Well, it's not. There's a federal change in the last 6 months that now allows QM mortgages to count that ADU income towards their DTI to qualify.
Oh, I haven't heard about
you need to have a good relationship with your lender or lenders. Some people will say, oh, well, my lender says I can't buy an ADU because they're going to treat it as a duplex and I need 15% down, even as an owner occ, not 5. call a different lender. Lenders are not created equally, even if they're Freddie Fannie backed, even if they're selling QM products, which is a qualified mortgage, traditional standard stuff. We're not talking portfolio lending here. So start with the lender. You need to have an amazing relationship. It's, again, back to what I said about the planning and zoning office. It's a people business. We need to form relationships with our lender, with our realtor, with a land use planner, with our community development office. There's so many different relationships that we have to build to execute this. And to your point, Chris, it's not easy. And that's why there's opportunity. If this was easy, everybody would be doing it. And I had a conversation last night with a woman from Rocky Mountain Women Invest Group about the potential here. One thing that's negative is there's such a constricted supply and there's so much red tape. But on the other side of that bottleneck is this wide open space where you have very little competition. So the first people to market are going to do really, really well because it's so hard to get there. That's why there's a profit. If everybody could just build whatever, it would actually be good, and there'd be huge downward pressure on pricing, which we need really as a nation. But that's not the case. So we have constricted supply, super high demand. Denver's a great spot. The financing piece, if you can't purchase one, there's a lot of different ways that we can look at lending on an accessory dwelling unit, but it really does start with the math, and it depends on the market you're in. An ADU costs about the same to build in Aspen as it does in, think of the crappiest city in the crappiest state. I'm not going to pick on anybody, but it's very similar. Yeah, it's very similar price wise. So we only want to be looking to build these with our own money or with creative financing or with construction loan or bridge loan or gap funding or private money or hard money if it's in a market that has a really high demand and high rents. So this area, site specific, again to Denver today, is a great spot. I tell people, if you can build an ADU, this is one of the few markets where you cannot lose. You cannot lose with the demand and the price and the way people are flocking to this area because of the sun and the mountains and a million other reasons. So try to fund the ADU in any way that makes sense. I'm a huge proponent of long-term fixed rate debt. If it's a new purchase, there are plans where you can show up to the closing table with a qualified vetted builder and a set of plans and said house and close them all together. You can do bridge funding. Everybody always asks me, Derek, how do you build an ADU? You can't finance them. And they actually are fairly defensive of it. And I always just say, well, the same way you would go flip a distressed property. Nobody's going to lend on it when it has little value. You have to put some skin in the game up front. Where you get that skin is just like doing a rehab. It's how do you go how do you burr a house that nobody's going to lend on? Well, you come up with private money, or you borrow from your 401k, or you use savings, or you ask rich uncle or rich aunt. You put together a financial stack of however you can because the deal makes sense. So that's probably the funding piece. And then there was one more part of the question.
Can I peel back that funding piece on here? Because, I mean, and you said that there's about 450 permanent ADUs since 2010. Sounds about right. From we hear there's 80 a year. So that sounds about right. Now, I agree. 30-year fixed debt is amazing. I would say a good chunk of those ADUs are probably in like our areas, like the Highlands, Sloan's Lake, where these are $1 million plus properties. Like thinking of the last handful of ADU transactions we did, I think the last two were in the $1 million plus range, and 2 were $600,000-$700,000 range. So 2 fit within the limits. 2 are in the jumbo territory. So now we're doing a whole different financing on there. Do you run into like many of the jumbo loan territories for ADUs that you build or you're part of out in Oregon?
No, we brushed up closer to it. So the actual cap on a jumbo is different per region.
Yeah.
And in our region at the time when we were pushing up to it was like 550. And it's since been bumped up to like 729. So we don't, but just for the record, I don't sell houses. I've never sold an ADU. I'm not a realtor. I don't build to sell. I build to rent. So I don't usually have that problem because that overall end price appraised value is irrelevant because all I'm doing is refinancing out what I have in it, which is considerably less. That's how I'm adding value. I need that value hat behind you. I would just like put it on. So that's how we drive value, is by building it. So we don't push up against that. But that's a good point you bring up, that some of those high price tags are probably because it's that ADU property. You
Yeah.
say it was built for 250, but if you took that ADU away, that property might sell for 350 less. So that's actually, I would say, a benefit to build an ADU to put yourself up into jumbo terms. Yeah, you may have a little bit smaller buyer pool because of lending regulations, but you have so much more demand.
You made a good point last night at the event that I think you could repeat here, because even though you're building and holding, you still need an appraisal, right, for your refinance or however you're planning to, pull your money back out. So can you talk about what you do with, because there's only 450 ADUs, appraisers, lenders, they're just not as familiar with how to value them. So what are some things that you've done to, help get the value, help them see where the value is?
Yeah, wonderful question. So, there's a few different models, and you can argue this all day long, but there's the cost comparison approach, there's the comp approach, there's the taxation approach. In a market like this, it's going to be hard because they're not well respected. But I would say what I do and what people should do here is keep really, really good documentation of your build process. So if you're building an accessory dwelling unit, keep really good records. We never want to do an appraiser's job, but I've never had an appraiser say no when they show up and I say, hey, I know you're a professional. I'm not an appraiser, but I do have some data that I think will help you and save you some time in your research. Can I provide that? And they'll always say yes. So I have a very itemized list of everything that was done with retail price, not my price. And then I pull my own comps in the area. And different lenders will tell you different things, but even if there are illegal, or we call them legacy ADUs, if you can even find illegal ADUs, 3 of them that are similar, they can use those for value. So it doesn't have to even be a real ADU. And then on top of that, kind of a second piece of your question, I don't put qualified debt on a lot of these. A lot of these, when I build them with cash, and then I'm pulling a HELOC while it's still the primary mortgage before I go, so I get the best rate. And you can do that. You pull a HELOC. You can even tell the lender, hey, I'm going to move out of this next year. We don't care. It's your primary. We'll HELOC it at that. And you've got that 10-year draw period at that really sweet rate. And that appraisal is a portfolio usually for the bank or credit union. So they have different regulations. They don't have to follow that really strict federal checklist. So I provide them with a list of multifamily properties, commercial properties, even if I have several ADUs on one property. So not that again, it's not a manipulation tactic, and we're not even trying to lead appraisers. We're just saying, hey, this is what I'm really good at. I've put together some data that might help you. Would you like it? And they always take it. And that can help. We're kind of like around the corner helping coach them into helping our price.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, I say this as a human myself. We all, if you can make our lives or jobs easier, we generally want that. And especially with all that research, that is a great tip.
And the front end of that, and I spoke of this last night, and it's probably just as important, is if you're on the fence, if you're like, hey, I have this house and we just got a bid back for this plan set for this 600 square foot detached ADU. I don't know if it's going to return what it's going to cost. Well, go to a local professional respected appraiser in your area and pay them. Don't ask them, pay them for your time. Hey, can I give you a few $100s to give me an opinion of value on this plan set ADU built at this address next spring? And they'll give you a really good idea, if they're good, of what that's going to end up appraising when it's done. So I always say spend a few $100s up front to save yourself $250,000. If you think it's going to be close and you have to burr your money back out and you're counting on that appraisal to give you at least 80-20 LTV on the back end, get a warm fuzzy from a good appraiser first.
That's a great tip. So you referenced, I want to make sure we talk about this. Like, what is your strategy? You're building ADUs, you're building them to rent. Can you talk about what your investing strategy with ADUs are?
Yeah, Chris. So I've done the same thing for over 20 years now. I buy a primary house in an amazing area. I always focus on area first. The big 3 that I talk about often. Refer to tenants too. Tenants want the same thing we want as owners. They want location, they want privacy, and they want amenities. So I always start by buying a primary in the best location I can possibly afford. What started as a strategy of buying a primary house, remodeling it, building an ADU or 2 ADUs, living in it for a year, and then selling it and go repeating the strategy, I've just evolved into one level up from that, which is buying that same exact property. It's still my avatar, only it has a large enough lot that I can do that. And I can split the lot into 2 or 3 lots of legal record, completely new tax lots, where I can then go build a primary house and 2 ADUs. So I take these single family houses that nobody wants because they're market rate or higher. I usually pay over market rate. Most of these are on the MLS. Lately, they're not, but traditionally they've all been on the MLS at not a discount at all. But I look for an anomaly. I look for the development potential. So you'll hear infill housing more and more. We're all young. We're going to be investing for 50 years. Like infill is going to be like the most common word in real estate and development in 10 years. Right now, people are like, what's infill? And infill really means we're filling in these large single family lots that aren't great use of infrastructure and space. So I just look for large lots in my markets that are fairly flat, that have good infrastructure, that are in good school districts with low crime, that I know my tenant. I know my tenants intimately. They're very similar. Most of them are teachers and nurses. They have a bike and a kayak and a bunch of outdoor gear, and they usually drive a Subaru Forester and stay for about 3 years. And so I build the product that they want, which is a small standalone. My best model that I build over and over is 600 square feet with a 200 square foot loft, 1 bedroom, 1 bath. Build it affordably. It's a simple rectangular design, cabin style bungalow. And then, I put nice products in that they want. They want real hardwood floors. They want granite countertops, custom cabinets, in-unit washer and dryer, and they want it to stand alone. It's that privacy piece that's huge.
And a loft for their kayak.
And a loft to store their kayak. And my first few, I was like, everybody has a 12-foot kayak and there's no storage unit big enough. So I had to design my unit around what my tenant wants. And that's why I've had the little bit of success I think I've had is because I never was like, what do I want? It was like, what does my tenant want?
Yeah, what does your customer want?
What does the end user want? And then I provide that. So a lot of the strategies I teach to homeowners, first-time home buyers, is the attached ADU because it's so much more affordable. But my strategy really is finding these spots where I can do the detached because the tenant wants their own small, private, custom, standalone house.
Yeah. So I want to ask you about these poison pills, because as we were chatting before we hit record on the podcast, you were like, there are 2 big poison pills for ADU. What are those?
Yeah,
and do we have them?
Yeah, good question. So Denver specific, yes, you have one of them. The first and foremost that comes up often Denver doesn't have, which is a parking requirement. So a lot of codes across the country, and these accessory dwelling unit codes are spreading like wildfire from the West Coast to the East Coast. They're going around the Midwest, but they'll eventually move in there as well. But the off-street parking standard is hard because as we infill semi-urban areas, they were set up for, say it's a 1,700 square foot. That was set up for 3.2 people and 2 parking spots. Driveway aprons were built that way. Garages were built that way with 16-foot openings. Nobody really planned for 3 or 4 parking spots. And a lot of cities have said, okay, well, the state's mandated that we accept ADUs, but we can still have some of our own siting and design standards in here. So they put in these little things that keep investors from building these and stacking these up. Or neighborhoods get together and band together and say, we don't want apartments in our backyards, and we'll make sure there's a parking requirement. So the off-street parking spot, which Denver doesn't have, kills a lot of ADUs because a lot of times you just don't have room to build parking. Your lot's not wide enough.
So you're saying a lot of these parking restrictions are just the way the local neighborhood or the local municipalities are pushing back on?
Yeah, it can be. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, and there's lawsuits going on in several states right now.
Okay, I didn't even think about this.
To address that. Yeah. And then the other one, which is probably even larger, is the residency requirement. So that's when a city says, yes, Chris, yes, Stacy, you can build an ADU, but it has to be your primary residence. And if you ever sell it, the next primary owner may or may not be able to rent it. But the point that we're going to focus on here is you can't have more than one as somebody that finally went through years of process and headache and figured out how to perfect that product in your market, and then you're one and done. So as opposed to getting efficient and repeating the strategy over and over and actually adding much needed infill workforce housing, they don't let you do that here. There are some workarounds, and I don't want to get too gray in the code, but If you are an owner-occ, Chris, you build an ADU and then you want to sell that to somebody else, you can always do a change of use. You can pull the oven out and put in a 110 volt plug-in countertop appliance and just convert that into additional living space. And it's not going to be its own second dwelling. You might have to pay some fees and some address assignment, stuff like that. But there are some workarounds. I did talk to the director of the ADU project legislation, and he said that they were pretty close to getting that dropped, and maybe in time it will come off. But right now in Denver, the residency requirement isn't great for investors, but we still have 100,000 single family lots that could have one of these. So there's a lot of people that could still really deploy this and do a lot of good.
Stacy, for the residency requirement, is that for, so I got two things popping in my mind around here. Is I know there's some different zoning for ADUs. Is that it's only certain types of zoning that have that? Is that for residency, or is that for ability short term? I'm getting, because you've told me this in the past, I'm getting hazy.
So that there is a caveat. If you have 2-unit zoning, I don't believe the owner occupancy rule applies for ADUs. It's when you're in the single unit zoning with the one on the end, that zoning allows for ADUs, but that's where you also have to live on the property.
Okay.
And that's what was on the docket with this project, to maybe get that removed and, make it more, so that there could be more opportunity for different types of rentals.
And this is for the city council vote next week?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
You can still go on, Denver's website, look up their ADUs. They've got the whole summary proposed. You can still make comments. So,
by the time this podcast's out, it's going to be done. So.
It's going to be done, but it doesn't hurt to, continue to reach out to let your city council person know your thoughts on
get plugged in.
That. And then the short-term rental thing is its own beast. That's totally
separate.
That is, no matter what, you have to be owner occupant in Denver. So if you're thinking about short-term rentals, it has to be part of your primary residence.
Okay.
And she brings up an excellent point that's worth talking on just for a couple minutes. And that's, these public meetings are where actual change happens in your city. And I know that as a past sitting planning commissioner in one of my markets, that the policymakers, the city council, the planning commission, these committees, working groups, they're just normal people volunteering their time. They're not land use experts. They're usually not investors. They're usually not developers. A lot of times they vote based on emotion and based on what their constituents and neighbors say, or people in the audience. So I encourage everybody, you don't have to be some kind of diehard drum pounding advocate. Show up at a local meeting, sign up to speak on a non-agenda or agenda item, and just get up there and get your 5 minutes. That is where change happens. So few people do it. I can't tell you how many times I've seen 1 or 2 people come into a public meeting, make a comment with good points, well-spoken and respectful, in the actual legislative city code for that area. Maybe even the whole comprehensive plan changes because of what 1 or 2 people said. So I don't have experience with that personally in Denver, but I promise, again, this is a relationship business. Show up and speak your mind. Like, that's where change happens.
I think it's very powerful. And we've seen that with Summit County up in the mountains with all the regulations that they've put in for short-term rentals. The loudest people is not necessarily the local community up there. So, it's really important to get your voice heard.
I agree. All right. So how, you were saying earlier, you're building for like 100 a square foot. How the heck are you doing that?
29 years of trial and error and failure, but it boils down to really 3 things. And this is something that I feel like I've perfected, but anybody else could perfect it too. And that's, first and foremost, start with a simple design. So many people over design and overbuild their ADUs. Okay. Start with a simple design, a nice square or a rectangular shape. Every pop out, every 90 degrees that we get off of a rectangle is about an approximate $10,000 starting difference. So if you want to make an L shape, or you want a pop out window, or you want a couple of dormers, it's just in the thousands. Each one of those little design changes is thousands and thousands of dollars, and they add up. So start
with, that's your rule of thumb for
that?
Yeah. Okay.
So start with a simple design, self-manage the project if you can. I'm a general contractor in my state, so I obviously manage all my projects, but anybody else can do that. You don't have to be a contractor. You don't know how to run a skill saw. If you can manage a budget and make a decision, be decisive, deal with a little bit of conflict once in a while, you'll be a great contractor, probably better than me, probably better than most. So that's the second. And then the third is do as much of the work as you possibly can yourself. So you can paint, even if you don't have any skills, you could do dump runs, you could do the landscaping, you could do runs to pick up tile, you could do a whole plethora of things that you have agreed upon already with your subcontractors to save yourself money. So to kind of recap those, start with a super simple design, self-manage the project, and do as much of the actual physical labor as you can yourself. That's how I build them so affordably. Another reason I'm able to hit those numbers is because I have a super simple plan set that I build over and over. So there's that economy of scale, that repetition.
Do you just have like one plan that's just...
I have a few. I've got a garage with an ADU above it that I like to build over and over.
Can you
and
just
then
kind of tell us what your go-to templates are?
Yeah. Well, one of them is free on my website. If you go to thataduguy.com and you go to the resources tab, I have 2 free plan sets that I give away. But the basic idea is a rectangular cabin shaped house. It's 22 by 24 feet. And then it has a 200 square foot loft above the bedroom and bathroom. So the back bedroom and bathroom is the back half. The front half is a great room with a 16-foot tall vaulted ceiling. And then I always use a single one wall galley kitchen. So by putting my kitchen on one wall, I've got one straight piece of granite that I can buy super affordably. There's no seams, there's no bins in the countertop. I don't have any wasted space or lazy Susan or extra trim. So the simple design is start with a rectangle kind of cabin approach with a loft. I get that extra 200 square feet for free. I've already built the structure. I literally just put floor joists above the bedroom and bathroom and deck it, and I've got 200 square feet of loft space. So that's the simplicity that I'm going for. We can do conversions if we're going to do a carve out or an interior conversion ADU, starting at about $50 to $75 a square foot. So those are my doing it for 30 years. I've really perfected the strategy cost. I don't say that to brag. I just say that to show the low end of what's possible. And then what somebody would expect to pay if you have a semi-flat lot within 100 feet of utilities and you don't have to change all the infrastructure on your house. In other words, you don't need a new sewer line on the primary. You don't have to upgrade the panel. You can start at about $250 a square foot for an affordable semi-custom builder. And that's the starting. People are like, okay, $250 a square foot, I'll build 1,000 square footer and it'll cost me $250. No, that's where it absolutely starts if you don't ever open Pinterest or try to get creative, because it just goes up from there. But the biggest trick I'll tell people right now to save money is make it smaller. Make it smaller. Everybody says, what's the max size ADU in my zone? Okay, it's 800 feet or 75% of your primary, whichever's smaller. All right, I want an 800 square footer. I want it to be a 1-1. And the fact is, an 800 square foot 1-1 is going to cost almost twice as much as a 500 square foot 1-1, and it's not going to rent for twice as much money. It may only rent for another couple $100. So many people over-design, oversize, overbuild, and then they overspend. And they're like, well, I got a quote for $350,000 for my ADU. That's just not worth it. Well, it's 1,200 square feet. It's got marble tile throughout. It's too big. It's you've overbuilt it. And a good rule of thumb for how much should I build for is try to back into the average square foot price of the primary house and your neighborhood. So if you're in an average Denver neighborhood where the price per square foot of the house is $400 a square foot, make sure you're at that or under on your projected build cost / appraisal for refi.
That's a great rule of thumb.
Yeah.
So you hear all this, Stacy, like these plans. I know, Denver has it's all these ADU zoning and setbacks and rules and this. How do we take amazing planning, amazing building, just right attitude for, hey, simple and small? How do we translate that to Denver? We got people here in Denver listening trying to say, that's awesome, Derek. How do I do that here? Can we copy and paste templates typically? Do you know? Or
I don't know for sure, but 20 by 24 seems like a pretty simple standard footprint that would fit, in a Denver lot. That would fit, and the lofted ceiling too, because we always have bulk plane issues. So
what's a bulk plane issue?
Bulk plan it has to do with the I'm not going to explain this well. These you can only
Sorry, put you on the spot. I
you
don't know
can
what it
only
is.
go so your roof line can only go so far into the space above you have. So you have to have angles.
So if it's a rectangular roof or
Mhm.
second story, running the bulk plan issues where the angled roof.
Right. And so it
typically
has to
doesn't.
fit into
Okay.
this whatever's set in the code. So having the lofted angled roofs should actually work really well in Denver. So I would say I think it is feasible. You know, we got to get you got to get your team together. We have to get an architect and a builder that, you know, can make sure it all will fit within the zoning code.
Yeah, that's a good point. You know what I would do if I was here? I would spearhead that, and I would budget, say it costs $5,000 for you to put together a plan working with the city. Planning is less involved with the design. They're just going to plot it and say, yes, you can meet the standards. You'd want to tie in with the building department and an engineer and an architect, and you could design an accessory dwelling unit, have it printed up, be able to give that away to your clients, give that away to your fellowship, add extreme value to so many people, and then try to give it to your city. So we did that. We took a couple sets of plans that we designed and we gave them to our city. And it took about a year for us to give them plans. So what happens now is when you come into the planning and zoning office in our area, most people ask about an ADU and they give them a little check sheet and they go out and they spend, thousands of dollars on design and they spend thousands of dollars on engineering and they get their cool little set of plans and then they start farming them out and they realize this is way more than I thought and I can't afford to build this, and they never build.
Yeah.
Where if you can just go into your planning department and it's just like, hey, that Chris and Stacy put together this set. It took them a year. They gave these to the city, and now we give these out for free. So anybody that comes into the planning department or emails the planning department, they can say, hey, here's a free pre-approved set of plans that's already been checked off by building, and you can go start budgeting and planning your process. Is there clout in knowing that you designed those? No, just you're helping your community. I'm surprised they don't already have pre-approved plans here, but if somebody wanted to do that, if it cost you $5,000 and in 25 years you're driving around with your grandkids and there's 200 houses that you designed to help your city, like how good would you feel? Like what's the ROI on that? Like it's infinite.
Yeah, that's really cool. I like that a lot. All right. So taking a step back, a little bit of a crystal ball question. Next 10, 15 years, how do you see just the general ADU landscape changing, evolving? Because it seems like, a lot of cities are changing, we're opening rules. Like, do you think we're at a point of like critical scale or mass where we start seeing a lot more ADUs getting built up? Like, where do you see us going over the next 10, 15 years, just from a pure macro level?
Yeah. I would see ADUs as we know them with that naming probably disappearing. And it's going to be more density based on a calculation. So it's just going to be more infill housing. Right now, we're seeing this happen in my state, in Oregon. We're seeing this happen heavy in California, where we've eliminated by state law through legislative action, we've eliminated single family zoning. And there's already a champion senator here that's written a proposed bill to do the same in Colorado. It's going to happen in every market that has a housing crunch where people can't afford to live. And right now we call them ADUs, in Oregon and California. Now it's duplexes, attached or detached. I like ADUs because the code's it's 10 pages or less. If you get into the multifamily code, there's a lot more standards. We're talking like sidewalk, curb and gutter, street trees, fire suppression, sprinkler systems. There's all this other stuff. ADUs are nice because you can piggyback off the utilities of the primary house. You don't need parking usually. There's all these little savings. But in the long run, we're just going to do infill housing. Call it a duplex, call it an ADU, call it a multifamily lot, call it what you want. They're going to say that you can build one house per 1,000 square feet of lot space eventually is my crystal ball guess. That it's less about what we call them and more about how do we fit more units into spaces that already have freeways, schools, fire departments, police departments, infill.
That's ultimately the problem and solution we needed.
Yeah.
Derek, this is awesome, man. If there's ever an opportunity for you to record a video in Denver for a future BP show, or you need an ADU out here, love to collaborate and go walk a property and just kind of like watch you in real life.
Oh yeah.
Point and talk to stuff and just kind of pick your brain. So if there's ever an opportunity, man, we would love to help you out and do it.
Darn it. Yeah, I did one yesterday for one of the Rocky Mountain Women's Group. She said, come over, I want to do a garage ADU. And I went and walked her property and we checked out the alley and we walked down the street and saw a couple people that had done it before.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah. So like we'll do the ADU ride along show.
Yes, I like it.
Perfect.
I love it. Derek, thank you so much. Of course, you're a wealth of information. Love your shows in Bigger Pockets. Your website, thataduguy.com, has a free templates, has great resources on there. So make sure you plug in and check out Derek. Thanks so much, man, for stopping in town for a couple hours.
Yeah,
we appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right. Thanks a lot, Stacy.
Yep.
We'll see you guys next week.